All right. Did I put what?
Do you have an app that puts Hebrew on your laptop?
Actually, no. This is a Bible software. It's called Logos. And then I have a library of books. And then I could create my own library too. I could upload my own books to it. So I have access to like 3,354 scholarly books. They're not like regular, somebody wrote it, had a vision, and so what I do is I try to be as much, I like to teach and show the evidence, so I want people to follow along. Sometimes we get so used to just teachings that are just more speculative that I want the audience to have another perspective. So this is a great resource because, for example, now, let me know when you're ready. Am I ready? Hey, I'm live. All right, Shabbat Shalom. So thank you for having me. Mike, thank you so much for having me. I'm in Indiana. I'm in Avila, right? Avila, Indiana, and it's cold, freezing. I'm from Florida. I'm not used to this cold weather. I'm supposed to be doing a long series of teachings tomorrow and Sunday. Let me let you know what I'm going to be teaching so you can follow along and you get an idea of the whole purpose of, of the teachings that I'm trying to do. As you know, last year I went to Turkey, Rome, and Greece, and I was able to do some research on site about the 7 churches of Revelation. And I learned a lot. It was such an impactful trip for me that when I began to study Acts chapter 13 all the way through, I more or less follow Paul's itinerary. We kind of started backwards because of but we follow the whole place. And I found how much I did not know about the New Testament. Even today, now that I was there, when I read a book in regards to Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, and I'm studying a lot about the Jewish life in the diaspora, in the dispersion, I was able to really understand why Yeshua said, we are in this world, but we're not of this world. I got it. But it's related to culture, but we never consider that. Every explanation that you've always heard is dealing with something completely different than what Yeshua is trying to convey in an environment. The narrative took place in a real culture. When we read the Bible, we never consider the culture that the narrative is trying to tell us. We read the words. They come from Yeshua, so automatically we're assuming he's talking to us in the 21st century. And we forget that he's speaking to them in the first century, and the principles and values apply to us today. But the audience was a conversation based on the culture, the attitudes of the day under imperial worship, imperial cult, Roman conquest, caste system. So tomorrow what I'm going to do, I'm going to start connecting certain things in Acts chapter 13 all the way through to chapter 19. We're going to be 5 teachings, and we're going to be connecting the cultural backgrounds. I took videos. On YouTube, with Wisdom in Torah, and on YouTube, I have 20 videos that I recorded, short videos, on site in every place I went to. 20 in English, 20 in Spanish. And I'm glad I took my wife's advice because she said, just do short videos and then you can expand on them later. So what I want to do when I find the videos, okay, because I have them, but I just got to get them in the computer. I want to show the video so you see what the place looks like. Some of you read Ephesus, but you've never been to Ephesus. And let me give you a little insight about that. I studied for almost 3 straight months Ephesus. I saw videos, all the churches, and whatever. I was looking into the whole, itinerary of Paul. But just the example of Ephesus alone. I studied videos. I read books. I saw pictures. I thought I had it handled on Ephesus until I got there. When I got there, I've never been there physically, so I didn't know where anything was. I had to hire a guide to help me walk around Ephesus. Although I studied, once I saw the things, I studied it. I know what that was about. But what I learned is how much I didn't know. I was only isolating certain knowledge or certain topical things. But when you get there, the whole environment, the whole city really brings to life the whole letter to the Ephesians. You know, I mean, some people, you ask them, where's Ephesus? They don't even know where it is on the map. But yet they preach out of it, but they don't know the context of the problem. So today I was reading on the plane as I was coming here, and I was able to go through Josephus and some of the other resources, and I understood what a Hellenist meant. And tomorrow you'll learn that when we get to chapter 16. So come ready, because what I want to do is convey the message of, okay, the Bible is telling us a story. There's a reason why he's telling us. Paul has given us insight into each one of the letters. That letter is written to a particular audience in a cultural environment, in a geographical location that we know nothing about. And then when I hear explanations about Ephesus and Philippians and all that stuff, and now that I've been there, it gives me an opportunity to weigh it out with its cultural background, you know, under the Roman conquest, which language they spoke, what was really the whole, you know, influence, Asia Minor versus Greece. And hopefully this will make sense to people. Okay, but tonight, what I want to do is cover the Torah portion as much as I can. You know, one of the things that I'm doing, they give me as much time as I want, but and I appreciate that. One of the things that I'm doing is using a methodology, and I want to show to you my methodology. It's a study methodology that I use with my students. If you've been following my ministry long enough, you know that I like to teach a lot. I'm using a lot of resources so people can see where I get it from. One of my biggest concerns is that sometimes people teach, they don't show their resources. So you believe it or you follow it just because you believe in that person. And then later on, you find out that it was not true. I don't want to be like that. I used to be a little bit like that. I don't want to be like that anymore. So I've decided to try to give you as much information as I can so that you can see it for yourself. So if you can transition to this real quick, I really would appreciate it. So this particular model that I have here is a methodology that I've used for a long time. Every single one of those, can they see that? Okay. Every single one of the, on YouTube, can they see it? Oh, cool. Every single one of those spheres I've studied. Covenants, righteousness and justice, honor and shame, new creation, chaos and order, sacred space. Then outside the spheres, you have death, chaos, rebellion, exile. And then on the right, you notice there's a ladder. And everything I study, and tomorrow I'm going to follow that ladder. We're going to be focusing on biblical archaeology, cultural context, historical context, geographical context, context of the temple, context of the book of the letter, thus context of the chapter, and then the biblical text. It's my way to be accountable. Okay, so when I teach something, I'm always thinking in one of these spheres. Tonight, I'm talking to you in regards to covenant. We're going to connect the Torah portion, Yitro, because the commandments are being read. It should be read in every community all over the world. Unfortunately, it's not. It's the Torah portion that covers the commandments of God. So what I want to do is share with you using my methodology that I use for my students. And every single one of my students in 39 countries now, they have to use it. It's as a guide when they start. Okay? So this is what I have a project in Spanish. This is what I have 13 of my guys and ladies, you know, they study with me and they also teach. I give them an opportunity. Each study, they do a teaching for 15 minutes. Last year was 10 minutes. This year was 15 minutes. So what we do, we divide the commandments in each Torah portion. Each Torah portion contains commandments. So instead of focusing on the whole storyline on the Torah portion, we highlight the commandments in each Torah portion. And then I assign to every single one of the people who are helping me based on the spheres. So we give that homework, we give some of those commandments to some of the students and says, okay, I want you to study the commandments from one of those spheres or one of the steps. And trust me, there's a lot of connection. One that is missing that I have to add to this is the legal context of Scripture. We hardly ever study the Word of God from a legal perspective. It's always from a theological perspective. And I submit to you, that's the problem that we have in all the arguments, because we do not know how to differentiate between a theologically minded text versus a legal text that could be applicable with theology. We always look at theology first. We never consider the legality of the text. This is the reason Jewish people, they hardly ever have certain arguments about certain things in the Bible. They know the difference between a mincha and a halakha, a custom and a ruling. They understand how to walk according to the law, not according customs you can argue about, but the law is concrete according to the Torah, so they follow. But we're still finding our way to that. Is this making sense? So what I do, I assign one of those commandments, and this year I allowed my students to pick which area they want to cover that commandment. Now you have 13, 15 people. You count the spheres. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Plus the legality, 14. I got 14 people doing 15 minutes, and they have to watch each other's videos because they're not covering the same thing. They're presenting it from a different perspective. Now we have a Bible study. Because the areas that you may miss, she's going to cover. Now, when you listen to her, you say, oh, okay, now I understand why you said something in the text. Because everything interconnects. So this is how I study. Tomorrow, I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be connecting all of these dots using cultural background, Greco-Roman, history, Greco-Roman law. And sometimes we read the book to the Romans. We don't know what the book to the Romans was written from and what year it was written and what was the problem in Rome. We just read the letter to the Romans. It's a letter to the Romans, not to the Americans. There was a definite problem. Who was the emperor at the time of Paul writing? What happened in Rome that Paul had to write a letter? Where did he live years later after writing the letter, after he was arrested and he wanted to go to Rome, and he ended up living 2 years in Rome? Where did he live? I was there in the community where he lived. In the museum, they told me where the ancient synagogue was. It's quite possible that the remnant of that synagogue that I saw, that today's a restaurant, okay, could have possibly be the synagogue that he went to. I went to the corner to the synagogue that, according to the Jewish Museum in Thessaloniki, which is in northern Greece, right exactly where they knew that the synagogue was in the first century, that the Bible talks about. I was right in that corner. It's no longer there. But even the Jewish synagogue knew that in that corner, that's the synagogue. That was there through millennia. You see, now everything comes alive. And that's what I'm trying to do, to try to convey to the audience, people who study the New Testament, to consider it not so much from trying to look at it from a Hebrew roots, Messianic, Christians, or the Baptists, or whatever perspective, but to take the time to say, okay, when this letter was written, what was the problem? What was the question? Who was the audience? What year was it written? Where was it written? And why was it written? And now we have a more of a view, a broad view of what the letter is trying to tell us. For example, have you ever studied literary genre in the first century? You need to know that because there's a doxology, there are epilogues, there are different things that Paul is using at a high level of understanding. I learned that when I went to Greece and Philippi. When I went to Greece, I realized how high level Paul was talking in Greek rhetoric. I didn't realize he was so amazingly trained to speak at their language without compromising the values of the Torah. It was amazing. I understood why the gospel spread so quickly throughout the kingdom. Just by understanding what the bema was. If you ask my wife and the people that came with me, I drove them nuts. Because what really resonated with me was understanding what the bema is about. I knew about the bema in the book of Corinthians, when Paul was taken to Gallio, who, by the way, was a Spaniard. You know? But I didn't realize the importance of the bema, the speaker's platform, at the agora, the marketplace, that will facilitate the expansion of the kingdom because of its location. Is this making sense? See, these are things that we don't really think about. So let me go back now to this. Tonight, I want to really focus on the commandments of God. Tomorrow, we're going to be really looking into the topic of the first century. But this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to explain to you the purpose of the Torah portion, Yitro. Then I'm going to read some of the commandments. There's too many of them to read right now. For example, they are right now in the Torah portion, Yitro. We have 17 commandments. On that Torah portion alone, 17 commandments. We're going to read some of them. Not all of them. If we have time, we'll cover them. But I need to give you the structure and what it means first. If I don't do that, then I'm not doing a service, because then you're not going to be able to follow the audience. It's not going to be able to understand why the Torah is so relevant and why it's so important. So if you would allow me, I want to take the first 15, 20 minutes explaining it using the methodology. Because the whole purpose of the Torah is to make us into sacred space. Sacred space, scholars understand what sacred space is. Sacred space is when you are going from the realm of death into the realm of holiness, or any kind of temple that is set aside, or anything set aside. It can be your living room, your bedroom in your house, where you and your wife sleep. That's sacred space for the family. Not anybody have access to your bedroom. You see? In the Bible, sacred space is the temple. In the universe, the earth is sacred space to God. He established it that way in creation. So when you look at the slides or the methodology, we're going to be focusing mainly on covenantal relationship, on the structure of a covenant. That's all we're going to be talking about. But I need to let you know the importance as to why God established covenant with Israel. For what purpose? What's really the underlying message in the Torah from the book of Genesis all the way to the book of Revelation? This is the same underlying principle. God is trying to destroy death. He's trying to restore humanity back to his sacred space. And the book of Genesis begins with chaos, and he brings order to the cosmos by giving function. Like, for example, the Canaanites used to worship the moon and the sun. In creation, God doesn't even name the moon and the sun. He calls them luminaries. He gives them function for times and seasons. He doesn't give the importance as of a name so people will worship, which is the core of really some of the commandments. You should not worship any other gods or anything above and below. There's a reason why that is. In light of Mesopotamia and ancient Near East, we have to consider that the audience understood the language that he's using in the books of the Torah, within the Torah. We are now foreign to it because we're removed from its environment. To us, it's inconceivable to worship certain things. But yet to them, it's inconceivable if they see us the way we worship certain things. You see what I'm saying? So if you see covenant, that's the core. It starts with a covenantal relationship. Then righteousness and justice. Righteousness and justice is an area that completely transformed my life, understanding it. In the book of Psalms, chapter 89, verse 14 and 15, it says, righteousness and justice, mishpat v'sadaka. Righteousness and justice is the foundation of God's throne. When I read that verse in that perspective, I asked myself a question. So what is God's definition of righteousness and justice? Not mine, but God's. See, we try to redefine terms according to our understanding. And that's why we're always lacking and we're always falling short of God's expectations. But when I began to understand what righteousness and justice meant to God, then it was easier because then I knew exactly what the ministry of Yeshua should have been. Everything Yeshua says, the Spirit of the Lord has anointed me. He has anointed me to give good news to the captives, to free the captives. In other words, acts of righteousness and justice. By and large, in the ancient Near East, a king who acted on behalf of the poor, the needed, the widow, the strangers, the alien, the needy, who released people from taxes, who freed the captives like Cyrus, will be considered a righteous leader or a righteous king. Didn't mean that he was a perfect man, but he's doing righteousness. Now, God is recruiting righteous people from among the nations. They are righteous people. They're not in covenant with the God of Israel. They are people who do not commit murder. They do not commit certain things. Now, they're not in covenant with God. They're looking for the God of creation. They may be in idolatry, but they're not in covenant with the God of Israel. But they're good people. I know they got great hearts. They help the needy, the homeless, the strangers, and they do acts of righteousness. And our job is to recruit those people for the kingdom of God, because we need them so that God will receive the honor of the righteousness and justice. Equally with somebody who's evil. We try to make sure that they know that there's hope. That the God of Israel, He is righteous and He is holy and He'll execute justice, but He'll give you a gift that you do not deserve. Thus He gives you honor, which will be the next one. It's getting warm. Don't make me too warm now. Okay? So then He gives you honor. He gives you a new name. He brings you out of shame. Remember, the ultimate shame is death. That's what Adam introduced in the world. Death is the ultimate shame. And death becomes the core essence of the ministry of Yeshua. How to point life back into God's kingdom. In other words, He healed the leper. He healed the leper. He heals the sick. He takes care of the widows. Everything He did is actually according to righteousness and justice. That's why His message was received. That's why they celebrated Him, because they knew that He was doing things that would help the people. Okay? So covenant, righteousness, and justice, honor and shame. New creation. Paul tells us that we are a new creation in Messiah. Right? Have you ever wondered why we're a new creation? Because God has defeated death. So now we come into the realm of life. How will we know that we're in the realm of life? He seals us with His Holy Spirit, which now gives us honor. We are set aside. We are sanctified. That's why He invites you to Shabbat. That's why He invites you to Passover, to celebrate your redemption. That's why He invites you to Shavuot, to celebrate your permanent freedom. Yom Teruah, Yom Rosh Hashanah, to celebrate God as the King of the universe and throne ceremony. That's why He invites you to Yom HaKippurim, to celebrate Him as a judge, to call upon Him, cry out to Him, and He would extend mercy and grace. That's why we go to tabernacles, which is the ultimate celebration over death. It's so powerful that the last prayer, when you dismantle the sukkah, the last thing you do, there's 2 commandments for Sukkot. 2 commandments to keep for Sukkot. Nowadays, build the sukkah and wave the lulav. 2 commandments. And when you dismantle the sukkah, there's a prayer. It's interesting. May it be your will, O Lord our God, King of the universe, that next year we'll build our sukkah with the skins of Leviathan. And I thought, what in the world is that? Well, when I began to study the ancient Near Eastern context, then I understood about the sea monster. It's called Raab, Leviathan, the dragon. It's exactly the same figures you see in the book of Revelation. Well, what's interesting is you have to study the Baal cycle to understand that language. The Baal cycle has to do with what the Canaanites believe about Baal. Baal had a cosmic war against the sea and against death. Yam and Mot. Now, how is this related to the story narrative? Last week's Torah portion. God told Moses to tell Israel, I want you to go to Pi Hahiroth, right in front of the sea, by the tower Migdal, overlooking Baal Saphon. Baal Saphon was a temple to Baal to demonstrate the victory over Yam and Mot, the victory over death and also the sea. Now, why is this relevant to us? Because you see, when they crossed the sea, all the Egyptians, they died, and all the Israelites survived. And then they sing a song of victory, proclaiming God as their king. And what do they do soon after? They build a tabernacle, which follows the blueprint of what Messiah will do. He will defeat death. Then the Song of 144,000 and Song of Moses in the book of Revelation. And then the earth is going to be regathered again for God after 1,000 years as sacred space. We're going back to the garden. Same story being repeated. Book of Genesis begins the way the book of Revelation ends. The book of Genesis ends the way the book of Revelation begins. The book of Exodus begins the way the book of Genesis ends, with the exile. The book of Exodus ends with the way the book of Genesis begins, with the presence of God restored. Eden restored. The story is the same. So when you look at the methodology, outside of the spheres, you're going to find four things: chaos, death, exile, and rebellion. And that keeps you from the inner part of the spheres, which is life, order, Eden, and holiness. Ultimately, it's all about God and His temple. Is this making sense? I'm trying to give you an idea more or less how I study. So when you listen to my teachings, you can relate a little bit that I'm just connecting different dots of all the studies I've done for 25 years. It's my way to understand this. I figure, hey, if I do a systematic way, maybe you can follow along. Because people always ask me, how do you make all these connections? Because I'm thinking thematically. I'm not thinking verse by verse. The verse will come when you connect the dots. Does that make sense? All right, so what's interesting is what keeps you outside the spheres and inside only those people who are moral purity. And if the temple was standing, moral and ritual purity would allow you access through the covenantal relationship, through the righteousness of God, by the honor of God, you becoming a new creation so that your life will be orderly and now you become sacred space. You are a holy nation. But if you choose to be morally impure or unclean, by the way, moral purity and moral purity can be achievable anywhere in the world. Ritual purity can only be achieved if there's the temple. We are all ritually unclean, all of us, but we should all be morally cleansed. If the temple's standing, to go to the temple, the ultimate goal is to be ritually cleansed and morally cleansed. Morally first. You follow? This is important. Because the argument Yeshua's having in Matthew 23 and Mark chapter 7 is not against the so-called traditions of the rabbis. It's about some of the attitudes of the Pharisees that they're trying to impose ritual purity outside of the temple proper, making it difficult for the regular person to follow anything within the Torah. And Yeshua is saying, wait a minute, you're outside the temple proper. We are in the Galilee. But this person should be cleansed morally, and they should be accepted. If they want to be ritually cleansed, as long as they don't touch a corpse, I don't care who you are, you touch a corpse. Numbers 19 tells you have to now go through the process. Nothing that touches death can be acceptable to God. Interesting. Right? So what allows you to come into the kingdom of God is that you're turning from idolatry. So the commandments in this week's portion all deal with the relationship of sacred space. How God makes you a holy people. In order to raise your honor. Now, let me give you a little background in regards to this. There are 17 commandments in the Pasha, Yitro. There are 3 performative and 14 prohibitive. And we need to study these out. And we may not be able to cover them all, but I want to at least get to chapter 20, verse 8, all the way to that one. We know murder, we know envy, we know those things should not be done, but there's still a lot of questions as to why and how do we sanctify Shabbat. Okay? But what's interesting is that the Torah is written in a particular format that we really do not know. In the late 1800s, there was a lot of discoveries, and they found discoveries in Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. And there they found some ancient documents, and once they actually translated them, they recognized that the book of Deuteronomy was written in the same treaty format as some of the Hittite kingdom's treaty formats. Akkadian was the international language of his day, as English is today. Okay? Akkadian is no longer spoken. But back in the day, it was the Akkadian language in the time of Moses. So if I make a treaty with you, then there will be, I'm a king, you're a king, and you are the vassals of that king. So what happens is there's a treaty between us. There has to be an oath. There has to be conditions to this treaty. There was a very structured format that the Torah actually contains. In other words, the Torah would have been considered a treaty between God and Israel, a great king with vassals. And anyone would have known because the structure of the Torah is written in that light. It was written in a real time and space with real stuff. Everyone would have understood it. So once I come into conditions and I come with the oath and I'm already agreeing with, in this case, Mike, we're coming into a covenantal relationship. Once that is done, we have the treaty in 3 languages. Your language, so you can read to your people, my language, and then the Akkadian language, the international language of his day, so everyone will know that we have a covenant. Then you take your copy of the covenant, I take my copy of the covenant, and because we use the gods as witnesses. Now we go to our respective temples and we place the covenant at the feet of the idol that the gods that they worship. Notice that there are 2 tablets of stone when the commandments were given. Why 2? And by the way, Meredith Kline, one of the greatest scholars in the late 20th century, he did a great teaching on this stuff. He wrote a book about this stuff. And the book of Exodus says that the tablets were written in front and the back. Because one was for Israel, and the other one was God's commitment to them. If you understand the ancient Near East, you understand that. Now you know why there's 2. Is that making sense? So once we know that, then now we have a greater responsibility towards our commitment based on an oath. Did you know that the Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. When we say the Shema, that is actually a covenantal oath of loyalty. One of the things that drives me crazy in the systems of religion that we really do not understand what loyalty really is. We talk about love, love, love. It's all about love. But in the temple, as well as in the ancient treaties, even in the book of Deuteronomy, there's verses in certain translations that says, I have loved you. God says, I have loved you with a loyal love. There's some great articles in the scholarly world about, the word ahava, ahav. It's actually a covenantal term. It's supposed to be loyalty. Ladies, you will know, actions speak louder than... Your husband can tell you he loves you all he wants, but if he beats you, if he cheats on you, if he lies to you, if he mistreats you, you're not going to believe he is loyal to you. Because his actions do not reflect what he says. In the ancient world, you show your love by the behavior and the actions you did in a covenantal relationship, regardless whether you like the person or not. I remember one time I had an issue with somebody, and I told him, I said, look, man, I don't hate you because you're a brother Messiah. I have no choice. But I don't want to be your friend. If you need help, I'll help you, but I don't want to be your friend. We're in a covenantal relationship. That's not hate. Just some people you don't want to hang out with. But we're bound in a covenantal relationship. By the way, the 10 Commandments are written in a very interesting way, the 10 words. The first 4, they are written in a vertical relationship between you and God, and the last 6 is a horizontal relationship between you and your neighbor. And the scholars call the 10 Commandments in the format of apodictic. There's casuistic and apodictic formulas, meaning that when it says apodictic, is God says to do, you do. You don't question. Because he said so. Casuistic is, if you do this, I will do this. Deuteronomy 28 is written in that formula, and chapter 21, 22, and 23 in the book of Exodus also is written like that. So when we read the 10 Commandments and we're arguing with God about the Sabbath, when God says to do, and we argue whether or not we want to do it, we don't realize that we are forfeiting the covenantal oath. And it's actually considered rebellion. It's interesting that the observance of the Sabbath is actually one of the penalties is karet, being cut off. There's a purpose for it. Anyway, so you already know about the Sabbath, so I don't have to keep talking about that. If you don't know the responsibility of the Sabbath after maybe 6 months or a year in the Torah, then I don't know what you're learning. People, that's all they talk about all the time. What to do in Shabbat. There's a lot of good topics to talk about, okay? Is this making sense so far? Yes? Okay. So let's go to the screen here real quick, and I want to share with you about the covenant sign, the covenantal on Sinai, how the structure is. This is from the HarperCollins Bible Dictionary. There's all kinds of resources. That's the one that I found last minute. I was looking to give you something because this is just from the top of my head. When I just stood here, we start talking. Okay? The Sinai covenant. The framework of a Sinai covenant has significant affinities to the suzerain-vassal treaties from the ancient Near East. Let me ask you a question. How many of you believe, and I know you all do, that Israel spent a lot of years in Egypt? Do we study Egyptology? How about, where did Abraham come from? Mesopotamia, right? The land of Ur, correct? Do we study Mesopotamian motifs and culture? I mean, they're going from Egypt and then going to Canaan. And God told them in the book of, I think, Leviticus, do not do what the Canaanites do and do not practice what the Egyptians did. But yet, we don't study the Canaanite culture to understand the contrast between God's ways and the Canaanites' ways. Then they spent time in Babylon, 70 years. And there are books that were written in the Torah, in the prophets, from people in Babylon, Ezekiel, Daniel, and some of the other books. Do we study Babylonian culture? Because we're quickly always saying, no, daughter of Babylon, come out of my people, O Babylon. But we never study Babylonian culture. We don't have no idea. Do you know why? Ezra chose the Aramaic letters of the Torah that we see today. The Torah letters are not the original Hebrew letters. There was pictographs, but then changed along the way. The message is the same. And people argue, well, Hebrew is not the real Hebrew. No, they're real Hebrew. It carries the same meaning it has. But did you know that those letters were known in the ancient world, in the Aramaic? They would have understood what it said. It was the international language of his day. Ezra did it for a purpose, so that all the nations would understand what God said. Brilliant what he did. But we find fault with the letters because we want it to be paleo, and we know that all those things change along the way, like the English has changed the last 500 years. It's okay for the English to change, but in the Hebrew language, the message is still the same. The meaning of the letters still the same thing. There's a reason why Ezra did it. So the framework of the Sinai covenant has significant affinities with suzerain-vassal treaties from the ancient Near East. Specifically, the Hittite treaties of the 14th and 13th century BCE and the Assyrian treaties of the 7th and 6th century BCE. In these documents, a suzerain, which means a great king, makes a treaty with a lesser king. So on Mount Sinai, when you read the Torah portion tomorrow, understand that we're going to be reading a suzerain-vassal treaty in which the great king is choosing all of Israel to be a kingdom of kings. That's why he says, you shall be a kingdom of kings, because we are all vassals and he doesn't treat us as slaves. Okay? It says, the main elements of the Hittite treaty are, number one, identification of the treaty maker, the great king. That's why the commandment says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt with a mighty strong hand and great power. He's using the same format in Exodus 20. Then you're going to have historical introduction, listing prior beneficial acts done by the great power on behalf of the lesser one. The whole introduction of the book of words, Devarim, is all about that. The whole introduction lines up perfectly when you go into Pritchard's book of the ancient Near Eastern text. You have ancient treaties, and it starts the same way. These are the words of the great king, such and such and such and such. And in the book of Deuteronomy, it starts the same word. These are the words. It's a covenantal renewal format. It's not a new Torah. It's a covenantal renewal to the second generation. Number 3, stipulations. The primary demands is for loyalty, which is a definition of love to God. So we see that in the 10 words. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not commit murder. You shall not do this. You shall not do that. Those are stipulations. If you willfully, rebelliously disobey those, you die. Because it's an affront to the authority of the great king who has given you grace by allowing you to be his vassal. In exchange for your loyalty or your allegiance, God gives you provision, he gives you protection, and he claims ownership over you. Thus, he must defend you by any means necessary. And in the wilderness, we saw that. They called out from Egypt, he redeems them. He sent the messenger, Moses, to declare war on the Egyptian authority. And then he takes them through the sea, defeating death, defeating chaos, defeating the enemy. He vindicates them. The people worship God as a sole Savior. Thus, then, he is enthroned. And then God says, I'm going to give you water. I'm going to give you bread. I'm going to give you protection. You be loyal to me. If you do not do that, then all these curses will come upon you. Number 4, a list of divine witnesses. And number 5, blessing and curses to come upon the lesser party as consequence of keeping or not keeping the treaty. The treaty was recited. A ceremonial meal eaten, thus Passover, is a ceremonial covenantal renewal meal. That's why there's some strict rules who can eat and who cannot eat. And the whole world treats Passover as just some evangelizing tool. They don't realize the extent of the commitment that you have to sit at that table. That's why we are commanded every 7 years to read the Torah and Sukkot. Now you understand the commandment is written because of this. It's a condition of the treaty. You find that in the book of Deuteronomy. At the end of the Shemitah, you're supposed to read the book of Deuteronomy. So everyone will hear. And when you hear, everyone says amen. That means that you now are bound to the covenantal relationship. So there is no excuse. That's exactly what Ezra did when they came from Babylon. In the book of Nehemiah and Ezra, he read them the Torah. Oh, it was a Yom Teruah, Rosh Hashanah. It took 2 days. And they all ratified the covenant there when they came back. Is this making sense? Yes? Don't be shy. The treaty was recited, a ceremonial meal eaten, and a treaty deposited at the feet of the deity, iconic representation. Well, guess what? There is no image of God, so therefore, there's the Ark of the Covenant. It becomes the testimony of witness. Now it's called the testimony of witness. And by the way, that was revolutionary what happened in Israel. There was no image on the ark. Imagine the psychological warfare every time Israel went to battle. And it is commanded the Levites went ahead. God as king was sitting on the throne, but no one saw him. A psychological warfare. They always had an image of their gods leading them in battle. And now the ones who have no God that is visible is beating everybody. Talk about making a statement. These people are protected. They're taken care of. They see the cloud on the daytime and the pillar of fire by night. But there's no image at all of their God. Why is there? We're going to talk about that when we get to the commandments. Now, when you read the book of Deuteronomy, you're going to find the same thing. So it is extremely important that we understand these principles. Let me read this paragraph because I think it's important. The narrative concerning the Sinai covenant of Exodus 19 and 24 has similar elements and identification of God who have performed saving acts of Israel. In Exodus 19, verse 4. Exodus 19, verse 4. And I forgot to change the version. I teach in Spanish and in English all the time. And sometimes I got to go back and forth, and I forgot to do it. So give me 1 second, and it'll be there in 1 minute. Okay? Hopefully, it'll work. Nope. So Exodus 19, verse 4, talks about, and you saw what I did to the Egyptians and how I took you on eagle's wings and I brought you to me. That's what it says in verse 4 there. It's giving you in perform saving acts. Stipulations, chapter 20, verse 3. There we go. And there shall be for you no other gods before you. He's giving them stipulations. You shall not make for yourselves any divine images of any form that is in the heavens above, that is in the heavens below, that is in the waters below from the earth. That's why you don't worship the moon. That's why God never put a name to the moon. It has a function. It's just to set the times and seasons. That's it. It has no power of its own. It's basically ruled by the cycle of the sun and the moon that God established in its place, and they don't change. It's incredible. The treaty recital followed by a ceremonial meal. And you see that ceremonial meal in Exodus 24:7. And he took the scroll of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do and we will listen. That's a ratification covenant. Am I saying anything that you probably never heard before? Am I saying things that maybe you didn't hear before? Okay. Now, verse 9 and 11 says, and Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 from the elders out of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel, and what was under his feet was like a sapphire tile work, and like the very heavens, and clear for clearness. And toward the leaders, the Israelite, he did not stretch out his hand, and they beheld God, and they ate and drank. So now the elders, they ate and drank, ratification of a covenant. People read that forever. They never understand what that means. Okay? Other elements appear elsewhere. Deposit of the treaty in the Ark of the Covenant is mentioned. Exodus 25:16, Exodus 40:21, Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 1 through 5, 31, verse 25 to 26. The Ark elsewhere is called the footstool of God in Psalm 99:5. Witnesses appear in the form of heaven and earth. I call heaven and earth as a witness against you. In the ancient world, they called the gods as witnesses against the treaty. By the way, the Hittites were called the nation of 1,000 gods. So when you read their treaties, they're mentioning as many gods as they can. Why? If you are part of the Hittite kingdom, and you worship one God, and you, and so on and so forth, then if I'm the king making a covenant with this king, I want to make sure that every single one of you submit with me. How do I do it? By using the name of your God as a witness of this covenant. You are bound to follow through now, because I'm your king, I'm your representative. Okay? Witnesses appear in the form of heaven and earth. By the way, in Deuteronomy chapter 4:26 says that. I call to witness against you today, heaven and earth, and that you will perish soon and completely perish from the land that you're crossing. You see that all throughout. Now, what's interesting is that this explains why there's famine in the land in Israel. Because when there's famine, there's no rain and there's no fruit. Because God, when Israel rebels against God, then the Lord withholds the rain. When there's famine, Israel knows we are in rebellion. That's why to this day, in Israel, if a few weeks after Sukkot it's not raining and there's no rain, the rabbis run to pray. Right after Sukkot, they're waiting for the rains. Because in Israel, those rains mean something. To us, sometimes it's an inconvenience. And I remember in Israel, I take tours all the time, and I remember people complaining, oh, it's raining, we cannot go touring. And then the guide, she told us, she goes, you know what's interesting? In Israel, the rain is a blessing. I rejoice when I see the rain. It means that God's still pleased with us. And here we are sometimes so selfish. We want to sightsee. We don't want the rain to inconvenience us. When in fact, it may be that God is pleased. You see what I'm saying? He speaks to us through a covenantal language. We never see and never consider that. Blessings and curses are listed. As in Deuteronomy, Leviticus 16, and Deuteronomy 27 and 28. The political structure emphasizes the seriousness of the relationship between God and Israel. And the ipso factor eliminates the possibility of foreign alliances. The Sinai covenant obligates both parties to each other. Israel must keep the stipulations: familial, societal, dietary, ritual, agricultural, or suffer severe punishment. This, however, does not mean that it's a conditional covenant. Indeed, the punishment that disobedience brings presumes that the relationship between the parties are still intact. It's just that it's like a father and a child. The child disobeys. You're not going to stop loving them. It's just they need to learn their lesson. Is this making sense? See, tomorrow around the world, people are going to be reading the Torah portion for Yitro, and they're going to be standing at a proper time and read the 10 commandments, the 10 words. That's a proper protocol. Why do we stand when the commandments are read? Because the king's speaking. And when the king speaks, Israel stands. We say, oh, we fear the Lord, but we don't know how the protocol of a king. We don't know how to approach him in a manner that's befitting our king. And the Torah, that's why in the synagogue service and in the liturgy, there are times when we stand. There are times when we sit. There are times when we bow. That's taken from the temple protocol and also from a kingship protocol, language and also actions. We say, oh, we serve the God of Israel. He's the king of creation. But we have no idea what the protocol of the king is. Oh, Yeshua will come. He will reign over us. He will be our king on the earth. But if Yeshua were walking through the doors, we will not know what to do, how to honor the king. Trust me, one of them is not going to hug him. We still have a lot to learn about the structure of what royalty and kingship is. We don't even know our own role. We do not really understand the commandments to its fullness. I'm still trying to figure them out. This is part of the process. So let's get into the commandments, and I'm going to read a few. I'm going to try to give you some backdrop. Hopefully, I'm able to get to verse 8 in regards to Shabbat. And I want to take the time to explain the liturgy that is done for Shabbat and why we do it. I never practiced for a long time the Kiddush, and then once I understood it, I'm faithful no matter where I'm at. And I'll tell you why it's important. Well, everyone thinks it's a Jewish thing. In reality, it's a God-ordained command. Because in the commandment says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, sanctify it, consecrate it. How? It doesn't tell you how. It doesn't give you an idea how to do it. There's a reason for that. Okay? So the commandments are 17 commandments in this week's Torah portion. How many of you here did not know that there were 17 commandments in this week's Torah portion? Please be honest so I know that I'm on the right path. Perfect. That's what I wanted. So you see, there's a really good resource, and it's called Tayag Mitzvot. Let me show you the... I don't have it here now. So what I did, I just put it into the program here. But the book is really good. You should get it. Okay? So I'm recommending the book to you. Please buy it when it's not Shabbat. And what it does, it shows you each Torah portion. And then you notice, I want you to notice Mitzvah 25, right? Performative commandment, number 12. So they take 365, positive and negatives. And then they number the positives and the negatives. Yes? Okay. Tells you the verse. Now, these are legal by nature. This is not theological, they're legal. And then in some of them, if you notice, I'm going to see let me go to the Torah portion of Shemot, which starts with Exodus 12, right? You see that the letters here, BD? Beit Din, Sanhedrin Council. So if you go to the next one, it tells you Beit HaMikdash, the temple. So it's going to tell you to whom it applies, where it applies, whether it's for men, for women, for Israel and the Jubilee, for outside of Israel, it doesn't say anything, for the Sanhedrin Council, for the temple, for the Levites, for the high priest, for the king. So when you go through them, you know exactly to whom it's speaking to. There are many times when I see people following commandments that are not applicable to them. It happens all the time. And the funny thing about it is they argue about it. No, we have to write a Torah. Excuse me, the king is to write a Torah. That's the commandments to the king. Now, if you want to do it, you can because you're not a scribe. You follow? You're not trained as a scribe. Because there are rules as to how to write the letters. There are rules if you make a mistake. This is a serious thing. That's why the Sophel, they're trained to do this. And once they make a mistake, they stop working. They get tired, let's go back tomorrow. Because the text is holy. All right, that's only one example. Let me move on. So 17 commandments, and I'm going to read the first one. It says, I am the Lord, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now, why does God have to introduce it that way? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. It's a classic introduction, what is a suzerain-vassal treaty. He identifies who he is, and then he says, this is what I've done for you. Now, if you look at the book of Deuteronomy, let's go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 1. There's a historical prologue. There's a preamble. These are the words that Moses spoke to all of Israel on the other side of the Jordan, in the desert plateau opposite Suf, between Paran and between Tophel and Laban and Haserot. And then he says, watch. He says this, and the Lord our God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, you have stayed long enough at this mountain. Turn now, move on, and go into the hills of the Amorites. And he goes on to the whole historical prologue. I've done this, I did this. I've done this. When you read it, you see what I mean. The whole chapter is trying to do it as a historical prologue. God introduces himself as the one who takes care of you. He is a sovereign. He is faithful. He is true. He is holy. He is kind. He is righteous. Compared to where you came from, Egypt. Remember what they did to you. Don't you dare do that to any alien. Do not become an oppressor. Because God hates the oppressors. God is a God of righteousness. He's a God of justice, you see. Okay. So, let's continue here. Hopefully this makes sense. All right, so now when he explains about, I brought you out of the land of Egypt, I'm going to keep it simple because I want to cover as much as I can. He is really, by and large, letting the people know, I am the one who takes care of you. I bring you on eagle's wings. I took you through the Dead Sea. I defeated your enemies. I took care of you. I gave you water. I gave you bread. And then the amazing thing about the God of Israel is that throughout its history of the Bible, every time Israel would derail themselves to worship other gods, God would lovingly call them back and says, remember what I did for you. Jeremiah, speak to the children of God. Tell them, I am the God, the great God of Israel, the God who brought you this. Remember what I did for you. He's not throwing it back in their faces. He's trying to entice them to return because he is good and because he is kind and because he is righteous. And in their condition of immorality, idolatry, and rejection of the covenantal relationship, he's still trying to entice them to return so he can bless them, so he can protect them, because he made an oath and he made a covenant with Abraham. And that particular covenant is different than this one. You see, the one on Mount Sinai is called a bilateral covenant. It's between a sovereign and a vassal. In Genesis 15, it will be called a grant covenant, in which the great king gives you a gift of loyalty. And in the case of Abraham, gave him descendants and an inheritance. So when I hear people talking about the land of Israel and talking about the Jewish people, regardless of their condition, because of the nature of the covenant that God made with Abraham, regardless of how Israel behaves, God is bound to the covenant with Abraham because he was the only one walking between the pieces. Abraham was sleeping. So that will fall under the category of a unilateral covenant, a grant. And according to the Bible, the gifts of God are what? Irrevocable. So that means that God cannot renege it. He cannot take it away. Just like the kingship is a gift given to David. Just like the priesthood is a grant, a gift given to the sons of Aaron. Numbers chapter 18. The land given to Israel. That's why we're going back to the land. Now, the systems of religion says, we're not going to go to the land, we're going to go to heaven. We're not Israel, we're Gentiles. They don't realize they're rejecting the covenant that is allowing the Gentiles to be grafted into. Because God made a covenant with Abraham, he says, and in you all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. And that's exactly the legal language that Paul later uses in the book of Galatians towards the Gentiles. He is making the case for the righteousness of God to extend beyond the borders of Israel and to say, if you want to seek a righteous king, God would allow you to do it, not because of your merit, not because of your righteousness, but because God is righteous. And he gave Abraham a promise that if you obey me, then I will give you descendants and I will give you a land, and no one can take it away. Mind you, in a grand covenant, the king, he can render judgment on the servant if they disobeyed the suzerain-vassal covenant, but he could not take away the gift he gave to them. Now, what's interesting is, let's say that Mike, I'm the servant, I'm the vassal, and I'm loyal to Mike, but then for some reason I did something really stupid, and now guess what? He needs to judge me because I broke the trust and the covenantal relationship of submissiveness that I'm supposed to have. He gave me a piece of land, right, as a gift. Now, no one can take that away. I may pay with my life for my disobedience to him, but the land will be an inheritance to my family. Or if my descendants come back from the nations and they repent, they will get a share of the land because guess what? It was a gift that he gave me. And it's irrevocable. Amazing. So when the system of religion says, oh, we're going to go to heaven, they're rejecting God's inheritance. Oh, we're only spiritual Israel. They're rejecting their identity and the covenantal relationship that was done on Mount Sinai and promised to Abraham as a covenantal relationship with him in Genesis 15. Did you expect that this to be so complex? We read it, but we never see the connections. Have you ever wondered why Paul, in all his letters, he's using Genesis 15 as a backdrop of his argument? He's speaking to Gentiles. So what is his legal case? By the way, Paul spoke Aramaic, he spoke Hebrew, he spoke Latin and Greek. And maybe another language because he lived in Tarsus, and that's part of the provinces of Pontus, Galatia, Lydia in Asia Minor, eastern provinces of Turkey. And they spoke dialects. This guy was highly educated. We never think about that. So why is Paul utilizing, Genesis 15 as a backdrop for his case in favor of the Gentiles? And the Gentiles, when they grab themselves, they don't grab themselves to their own tree. Romans 11 is quite clear. You're grafted into the natural branches. But if you study that chapter correctly, we miss the little words. If you go back, chapter 11, it's quite interesting. Because in chapter 10, you have to have a covenantal oath. That if you confess with your mouth that Yeshua is your Lord, Kyrios. By the way, did you know the word Kyrios is actually a word that connotated the authority of the emperor? The emperors were called Kyrios, Lord. I went to Pergamum. Tomorrow I'll show you. I went to Pergamum. And in Pergamum I saw the inscription of Trajan the emperor where it calls him the Kyrios of the land and the sea. It was a title in the first century alluding to the power of the emperor. So when Paul says, if you confess with your mouth that Yeshua is your Kyrios, your Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. In other words, it's not the emperor who has the power over life and death. It's actually the God of Israel who raised his son Yeshua, and he has placed them over his kingdom. He is your Lord, not that one. It was a countercultural language that Paul is using. And then in chapter 11, he tells you, all you Gentiles, you're grafted into the tree. It blew me away when I went to Rome and I understood these things. Okay, let's go to the next commandment. It's actually prohibited commandment 14, Exodus 23. Part of that day says, before gods, and have you shall not bow before any gods. I'm sorry, it went backwards. Okay, can you read verse 3 for me? Chapter 20, verse 3. Let me go here. Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. You guys enjoying it so far? Okay, good. Why? Is God that jealous? There shall be for you no gods, no other gods before me. Now, you got to understand, let me take you from Mesopotamian motif all the way to what it is, the time when the commandment was given on Mount Sinai. Remember, everything was based in the first century, as well as in the ancient Mesopotamia, Sumeria, the Hittites, Egypt. Every kingdom, religion and politics was one and the same. Separation of state and religion did not exist back in the day, as well as in Rome. Okay? So here you have idols. Everything was worshipped. In Egypt, they have everything was a god. In Mesopotamia, everything was a god. When you read the story of creation, God immediately starts outlining He is the sole owner of creation. From the moment, Bereshit bara Elohim et bashamayim va'et haaretz, hashamayim va'et haaretz. The beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But then He says in the second verse, and the earth was empty and void, and the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the waters of the sea. That makes no sense to me if you read it from 21st century mindset without understanding the language. He already told me He created the heavens and the earth. Why does He have to say that the Spirit of God hovered over the waters of the sea? Why is that important? Why do I need to know that? If you go to Rabbinical Judaism, Menachem Schneerson, okay, he said that was the Spirit of Mashiach hovering over the waters of creation. But when you go back to the motifs of the ancient Near East, it's actually a great message that the Messiah proved when He walked on water. Why did He walk on water for? I mean, would He stop being the Messiah if He didn't walk on water? So obviously, walking on water had a very strong message that we don't understand. We focus on the miracle, but we don't know the miracle or the message behind the miracle. The book of Job says that the Lord, He threats on the waters of the sea. You see, in the ancient Near East, they believed that the waters were chaos, the sea, Yam. And it was to the underworld. Every religion was the worship of the underworld except for Israel. Israel was not allowed to have any connection with anything with death. So when God says, and the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the waters of the deep, He is saying, I have dominion over the underworld, which means death. And that's interesting, it's tehom. The deep in Hebrew is tehom. And the scholars already understand that the word tehom is somewhat connected to the Mesopotamian word Tiamat. Then you have the story of Marduk and Tiamat is the same story as Baal and Yam, the sea. Therefore now, when God tells Moses, write this down, Moses is letting everybody know who has dominion over the underworld, which was the number one sign of a king being sovereign on the earth. Whoever had dominion over the waters of the sea had dominion over creation. That's why God told Israel to cross the Red Sea. That's why God told Israel to cross the River Jordan. That's why Jonah says, throw me in the water. That's why Yeshua walked on water. And He allowed Peter to walk on it, and when he took his eyes of Yeshua, right, and then he went into the water, he cried out to God, right, and then Yeshua brought him out. That's resurrection motif. Just like crossing the Red Sea, resurrection. Just like crossing the River Jordan, resurrection. Then you'll understand why the Rahab, the prostitute, right? Interesting. Rahab, the prostitute, is exactly the same name of Raab, the underworld monster. Why would Jericho not want to fight against the Israelites? Why were they afraid? They saw these people go through the River Jordan. The waters open north all the way to the city of Adam. Going back to the garden. Defeating death. And it was death that caused the exile of humanity from God's sacred space. Check this out. When you go to the book of Revelation, chapter 21. Listen to how it starts. And I saw a new heavens and a new earth, and the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea did not exist any longer. That makes no sense, because when you go to Genesis, chapter 9, in the latter verses, when you go to chapter 9, I think it's chapter 9, listen to how it finishes here. Oh, I'm in the wrong book. Yeah, no, I'm in the right book. chapter 8, I think. I'll find it. As long as there's seed time and harvest. Remember when he said that? It's a chapter, help me out, guys. It's chapter 7. The flood. When he makes a covenant. You're not going to help me out, are you? And he says he makes a covenant. There's a rainbow. He builds an altar. Plants a vineyard. I passed it? Oh, there it is. Where's it at? No, I know, everlasting covenant. I got you. But it says, as long as there's seed time and harvest. In other words, we're on the earth, and we're going to be on the earth for 1,000 years, right? And the God is going to come down on the earth after 1,000 years, correct? So we're going to be on the earth. God made a covenant with the heavens and the earth. He cannot break that down. As long as we're here. Yeshua said in Matthew 5:17. Nothing will change from the Torah. Heaven and earth shall not pass away, right? Until it's all fulfilled, correct? So let me go back to the book of Revelation. Check this out. So when you go back to the book of Revelation, what do you see? There was no sea. Remember, sea was chaos in the ancient world, Yam. And I saw a holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down out of the heavens from God, prepared like a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling of God is with humanity, and he, God himself, remember, Yeshua already reigned 1,000 years. Now the Father's coming down. Now watch. It says, he will take up residence with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will not exist any longer. That's the only way that God can dwell on the earth. That death no longer exists. That's the only reason why he dwelled in the temple, because the temple was devoid of death. Any connection with death was not allowed in the temple. Thus, the presence of God could dwell. That's why we have the Holy Spirit of the Lord, because we become a vessel to the Lord. So we are in a covenantal relationship. So we abide by the ritual, dietary, and everything in relationship with holiness, Kedusha. We are sealed with his Spirit. So even though we're still mortal, when we die, he's made a promise that we will resurrect. Is this making sense? You see how I'm connecting all these things? Because I'm using my methodology when I'm teaching you. So everything that I've studied now comes in play because I'm connecting the dots based on the spheres. In my mind, I'm following the spheres. And I'm following the information. What is it? 8:22. Okay. 8:22. Thank you. 8:22 says, as long as the earth endures, seeds, harvest, cold, heat, summer and winter, day and night will not cease. Okay? Meaning, as long as it endures, as long as it's here. So that means that in the book of Revelation, the sea represents a symbolism. What does the sea represent to the ancient world? Chaos. Death. The way to the underworld. That's always been the issue. And the Spirit of the Lord hovered on over the waters of the sea. And then in verse 26, it talks about humanity. I'm going to talk about why we should have no gods. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. It says, and God says, let us make humankind in our image and according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heaven, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every moving thing that is upon the earth. Revolutionary. That would have been a revolutionary statement back in the time of the Bible. To us, it means absolutely nothing. But to the Israelites, it meant everything. They believed only priests and kings and princes and prince can hear the voices of gods in the ancient world. Only the elite can hear the voices of gods. So God, what does he do? He makes an offer to Israel, Mount Sinai. Exodus 9, 5, and 6. If you obey my covenant, I'll make you a peculiar people, a holy people, a kingdom of priests. Right? He raised the level of honor, and in chapter 20, They all hear the voice of God. The only way they can hear the voice of God is reminding them that they're not slaves, that they're a royal kingdom. It's the only nation in the world whose God has actually spoken to the people. It's the only treaty in the ancient Near East in which the initiator was the divine, the deity. It was always between kings and kings. Here is between the Creator and people. And it's on the premise that you are going to restore as a real and new creation, an image bearer. The reason why God says, you shall have no other gods before me, is because he already established in Genesis 1:26 your purpose and your role. Watch, let's break it down. God says, let us make men in our image. Now, everyone focuses and they want to figure out, let us make men in our image. You're missing the point. All the arguments are based on that first part of the verse, when in fact the most important one is actually this one right here. The word image is selim. If you look it up in the Hebrew language, the word selim means statue. Hopefully you can see it okay. Statue, inscribed column, idol, image, figure, replica. So you're supposed to be the images of God on the earth. Not to receive worship, but to be the image bearers of God. That's why one of the names of Yeshua was Emmanuel, God with us. He was not called Emmanuel every time. He was called Yeshua. Yeshua was his function. He came to bring forth the understanding of God's salvation. But the angel says he's Emmanuel. In other words, he's the last Adam. He's the one who's going to bear the image of God, doing righteousness and justice and be moral on the earth. And Yeshua proved that humanity can live according to morality and righteousness. He proved that a human being can be moral and righteous. And when you die, God will vindicate you in resurrection. That's the message of resurrection. He was wrongly accused by the enemy, by the seed of the devil, by the seed of the serpent. And then God vindicates him. Why? Because he was a righteous and moral man who confessed to the point of death his loyalty to God. And God says, I will resurrect you, vindicated him. And after he resurrected him, put him in a great position of honor. Going from shame to honor, status reversal. Just like Egypt. From slaves, dead people. And remember the signs of Moses? Which sign did God give Moses to tell the people of Israel? They were not the same signs given to Egyptians. Didn't God tell Moses, put your hand in your bosom, and he put in there was leprosy, and then put it back and it's healed? Did Moses go to Egypt and tell that to the Pharaoh? No. He threw the staff and the plagues. But there were three signs for Israel: leprosy, the snake, and the blood. Right? How come two of those was relevant to the Egyptians, but one of those only to Israel? Leprosy represented death. The message is, God will heal your death penalty. Oh, not even an amen. You guys are a tough crowd here. I mean, this is an important message. That's a resurrection message right there. When he went here and this, leprosy, ooh, we're dead. Put it back in his heel. They would have been excited about it. We will be released. We're going to be free. Not from slavery, from death. Israel was dead men walking in Egypt. That's the message of the gospel. Right there in front of us in the book of Exodus. And we don't see it. Right? And then you have the staff. The staff turns into a nachash, a serpent. When they throw the staff in front of Pharaoh, it's not nachash, it's not a serpent, it's tananim, I think it is. It's the destroyer, the monster, the underworld god. And then one staff turns into a snake and eats the monsters of the Egyptians. Two of them. Why two? Why not one? The two staffs represent the upper and lower Egypt. The two kingdoms come together. That was a cosmic war, and God with the staff represents authority versus the staff of Egypt. That means the end of the war. That would have ended everything, but they wanted to keep testing the God of Israel, and he annihilated them. Now, have you ever looked into the, on YouTube, have you ever gone and looked at, don't put it on the screen yet, let me find it first, okay? I'm going to go to YouTube. I'm sorry, images on Google. Sorry. I want to show you something. This is important. Hopefully. I'm going to show you something from Egyptology. Ra. Serpent. Hopefully it'll come up. There it is. Now, this is important. I'm going to connect this. So there's one, there we go, right here. This one. Hopefully it'll get big. Do you see this here? Nope. This one. I don't want to subscribe. What are you doing? Okay, leave me alone. Okay, there we go. Come on. Do you see that okay? There. Hopefully you can see that okay. What do you see there? You see a ship. You see Ra sitting on a throne, Osiris in the front with a staff. Now he is hitting the head of the snake. Now the snake underneath the ship looks like waves. This is the resurrection motif of the Egyptians. They believe when the sun will go down, then Ra will go into the heavenly cosmic battle with the serpent. He will be on a cosmic ship with the snake and the waves, and there was a war. And then the gods of Egypt will help Pharaoh maintain Ma'at, the cosmic order, by defeating the serpent. Did you see that? That's a very important motif. Because you have that prophecy in chapter 3 of the book of Genesis. That the seed of the woman will what? Get it? So the whole motif, all the way through, has been the serpent. So it's interesting. The sun will come up, and they believe, oh, Ra defeated the serpent. So now we have resurrection. That's why they worship the sun. Now you understand the plague of darkness for 3 days. Now understand, this is a psychological issue here. 3 days you have darkness, complete darkness in the side of the Egyptians, but there was light in the side of the Israelites. To us, that means nothing. To them, it meant that, wait a minute, you mean to tell us that the God of the slave has dominion over the sun? We're doomed. We're defeated. But how many of you never saw this? So from this moment on, it would understand the story of Noah. A ship, waters. And they survived chaos, the underworld, and death. Resurrection. Message of resurrection. All of this are the motifs that the Bible talks about that we never really consider in the story of the Torah. So now, when you go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, it says we're supposed to be his image bearers. Thus, when the Bible says that you are now in image according to our likeness, the word likeness is demut, model, shape. So what does this mean? When you go back to the commandment, it says, you shall have no gods before me. It means that if you worship the created, you are renouncing the gift God has given you to be his image bearer. You are rejecting the gift God made you with purpose, with a function, to worship something that cannot hear, cannot see, cannot do anything. You're rejecting the gift. It's an abomination. It's an affront to God. And we do it today. You get an actor. You worship it as a star, as an idol. A woman singer, she's a diva. That's a Latin word for a goddess. They worship them. Get all these people in a stadium. I went to a football stadium when I was to Indianapolis. I was one of the brothers was kind enough to invite me to a football game on a Sunday. I didn't want to go, to be honest with you. And when I went, I'm going, wow, this is cool. Yeah, I had actually had fun. But then as I'm going in, I saw everything. I mean, there was not 1 minute that there was not something going on to keep everybody entertained. And people acting the fool. They're dancing, they're screaming, they're doing all. I'm looking around, and immediately I thought, wow, if only they will come together to worship the God of creation. Just that sobering moment, boom. And I requested to God, will you give me an opportunity and enlarge my territory to hopefully someday see this type of people, instead of worshiping football players, that they raise their hands to worship you. You know? I would love to have the opportunity. By the way, that's my motivation while I'm studying. The reason why I'm searching, I'm studying, I'm researching, and I'm preparing myself. If forever God is pleased with me and will grant me the opportunity of a larger audience, that I will represent Him the proper way, the way that will bring honor to Him, the way that will bring recognition to His righteousness, and the way that will be exalting Him in every way possible. So the nations will see how good, how kind, how righteous, how just my King is. That's the only motivation. I don't study because I want to be smart. I study because I want to serve Him. I just want to know Him. I'm grateful for the mercy He gave me that I know I don't deserve. Don't you think that I'm a little overwhelmed understanding all this stuff? I present it, and there are times I catch myself and go, wow, thank you, Lord. My Lord. But with that comes fear, because now I'm got to be accountable. I must be accountable. So this is one way. So when God says, let them, and look at the mandate He gives us. Let us make humankind in our image and our likeness, to let them rule over the fish of the sea. Well, wait a minute. In Egypt, they believed that only kings, right, can rule over creation. Slaves were nothing. Only the kings can rule. And you know what God does? He raised your level of honor. Says, you're no longer slaves. You are a holy kingdom, a kingdom of priests. And I will place my name in you. And now, you know what I want? I want to make you my image bearer. When they see you, they'll see God through you. When they hear you, they hear God through you. You're no longer just a mortal in my eyes, in their eye, a mortal in their eyes. You are my people. That's why Yeshua was called Emmanuel. So that everyone will know that God was speaking through Him. We take that so out of context, it's crazy. That's why He placed His Holy Spirit in you. He sealed you with His Holy Spirit, so He may dwell within us, just like He did in the tabernacle. Build me a tabernacle that I may dwell within you. That's what it says in the Hebrew. From the beginning, God's intent was to give humanity the opportunity to rule. They came out of Egypt. They were slaves. They had no hope in the world. And God says, I will raise your level of honor. I will raise you to be a kingdom of priests. I will give you a covenant. I will give you a name. I will give you covenantal relationship. All I want you to do is do not worship anything that I've created. If not, just make sure that when they come to you, you redirect them to me. We are the vehicle. That's why Yeshua was always leading people to the Father, because that was the mandate of the first Adam. But Adam wanted to be like God, and that's why he was thrown out of the garden. That's the reason why. That's why we're not supposed to have any other gods. We will be rejecting the gift He's given me to be a nation of kings and priests living up for Him. Not in office, but in title. Is this making sense? I mean, we have a great mandate. Can you imagine the God of creation choosing you from the nations because you cried out to Him? If you're not Jewish, you were not born with the knowledge of the God of Israel. Why would He hear you if you're not part of the kingdom of Israel? The 12 tribes. He is bound to them. He has a covenantal relationship only with them. So why should he care about anybody else? Because he's righteous. And because he already established a covenant with a Gentile called Abraham. And he made a covenant with him. He says, and your descendants shall be as the sea of the sand of the sea. I will start with 12 tribes from you. But then we're going to keep adding to those tribes moral and righteous people that could be my image bearers. To restore all of humanity back to the garden. That's what your job is. You're not called to argue about theology. We are called to be his image bearers. We are called to stand in the gap for what's righteous and what is moral. We are called to be something more than just humans. We are called to be his representatives in this human world. Not to take the glory for ourselves. Not to pretend we know more than anybody. But to redirect humanity to the source of life. To the source of creation. We missed the boat. The commandment is no longer read in any community anymore. What are we here for? We're supposed to that. When they hear us, they hear the words kings come through us. And they know that we are submitted, that we are subordinate to this particular king that no one knows. Well, what does he look like? Well, if you see me, you see the Father. Because that's our mandate. We are supposed to bear the image of the invisible God. That's what Yeshua was trying to say. If you see me, you see the Father. If you see Adam, you see the Father. We have a mandate. We have a calling. We're not just anybody. We belong to the kingdom of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Let's go to the next commandment. Are you enjoying yourself? Next commandment. It's overall. You should not make yourself a graven image. Same thing. Why are you going to make yourself a graven image? It's an insult to God. Same in the same light, right? The next command is actually 28. It's chapter 20, verse 5. You should not bow down to them nor serve them. Same thing. Avodah Zarah, a strange cult. Then the next commandment is chapter 20, verse 25. You should not serve them like they used to do in the Canaanite motif. Used to serve them. They used to do certain rituals to them. Okay? Then you have chapter 20, verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. What does that mean? Oh, you have to pronounce the name. The whole sacred name movement came out of this. They don't understand the structure of this commandment. In a covenantal nature, you always swore in the name of your God. Always. That's the way the commandment worked. You always swore in the name of your God. So when it comes to judicial matter, this will be an oath. In the ancient world, when you make a covenant, you use the name of your God as a guarantee of honor that you will follow through on what you said. It was a very serious thing. Today, if you go to court, they make you put your hand on the Bible. If you lie, it's called perjury. You can go to jail. In the Bible, you could die for using the God's name in vain in a judicial matters and covenantal relationships. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example how serious this was. During the Parthian Empire, after the Persians fell apart, the Parthians took over. From the year 200 something BC to the year 500 years. From the year 200 something BC to the year 245 AD. Almost 500 years. And the biggest war was between the Parthians and the Romans. Right? The borders was the Euphrates. There was a general, a Roman general, who actually make an oath of not loyalty, but of a treaty or an oath with a Parthian general. And he broke his oath. Basically cut his hands and killed him. Because he broke the oath. You don't do that. Okay? So when you take the name of God in vain, I have this lady, I don't know who she is, I hope she's not listening. Long time ago, almost like 17 years ago. I was teaching about the frequencies of the Hebrew language, 144,000, and the Song of Moses, one of my first teachings. She sent me a soap. Sent me soaps. I was grateful. I hope she wasn't telling me I stunk. But she sent me soaps and some things. The Hebrew rules, they do all kinds of things like that. Goat's milk and things like soaps. I think it's great. Don't get me wrong. But she sends me a soap with the name of God in it. And I'm going, you got to be kidding me. You expect me to wash my body with the name of God? Again, we want to be so holy that we mess it up. It's crazy. I told her, I'm sorry, I can't accept this. Thank you for the gift. But I cannot wash my body with the name of God in it. Are you out of your mind? Because we're not understanding what holiness is. It's not about pronouncing the name. It's about what you do while you pronounce the name. And by the way, when somebody has an issue with the name, and I have people all the time always challenging, whoa, the sacred name, you have to pronounce it. Really? So tell me, what's the protocol when every time you hear the name? Because if you tell me about the sacred name, fine, I accept it. Yod He Vav He. No one denies that. But what is the protocol every time you hear the name? To bow down and say what? There's a reciprocal. There's a verse that says you should ascribe greatness to His name. So thus, the whole thing when we say Baruch Shem Kevod Machuto Leolam Vaed, blessed is His name and His kingdom forever and ever, bowing down to our face. That's how they did it in the temple every time they heard the name of God. Are we doing that? Then we're not honoring the name. Not only are we not doing it by action, but through also in behavior. Action meaning to bow down and say, blessed be His name and His kingdom forever and ever. And action. You can say the name all you want. And if you're a lousy human being, you're shaming His name. If you don't pay your debts, you're shaming His name. If you don't follow up on your promises, you're shaming your name. If you're a terrible husband, you're shaming your name. If you're a terrible brother Messiah, you're shaming the name of God by doing so. This is legal in nature. No one says the name is not important. We are saying we need to be learning how to use the name in its right proper spot. If not, we're going to be we're going to be actually profaning the thing that we so desperately trying to keep. It's challenging enough? Does it make sense though? All right, so let's go back to the next commandment, which is the one that I wanted to get to. It's chapter 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Well, how do you keep it holy? Let's go to the book of Leviticus, chapter 19. And I'll be done pretty soon, okay? Leviticus 19, then we'll take some questions. Leviticus 19, verse 30. It says, you shall keep my Sabbaths. It's more than one. Special, there's holy convocations, weekly Sabbath, and the holy convocations or special Sabbath. First, seventh day of Passover, the Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom HaKippurim, Yom Kippur, and the first and the 8th day of Sukkot. Special Sabbath. That goes together with the weekly Sabbaths. Okay? It says, you shall keep my Sabbath, and you shall revere my sanctuary. I am the Lord. When you go to Leviticus 26, verse 2, you shall keep my Sabbath, and you shall revere my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Now, I want to show you something that is quite interesting. Okay? I was doing a study in my Spanish congregation. And when you look at the Siddur, Will, do me a favor. Open your Siddur, please. And he went somewhere. See if he gives me to it. Yeah, there we go. My sanctuary you shall revere, right? Leviticus 10:10 says, and to distinguish between the holy and the profane, as well as between the unclean and the clean, the common. Ezekiel 44, verse 23 and 24, it talks about the sons of Zadok, the sons of Aaron. And they will teach my people the difference between holy and what is unholy, the difference between unclean and what is clean, and you shall show them. In the legal disputes, they themselves shall stand to judge, employing my judgments, and they shall judge it, and with respect to my laws and my statutes and all the festivals, they shall keep my Sabbath, and they consecrate or. Okay? Okay, now what's interesting, Will, I want you to do me a favor. Find the Kiddush, the Kiddush. I have it right here with you too, and it reads, Yom HaShishi Vayechulu HaShamayim. Nachon? Yes? Now, what's interesting is, I want you to, and I want to show it. Hopefully, I have it here. Let me find it in Spanish. I think I may have it in Spanish. And I want to show it to you. But when you read, I want you to look at the first letter of the Kiddush. You have the Koran? Okay. Exodus 20. Give me 1 second. I'll find it here real quick. This Bible, it should be here. Hopefully. There we go. Please be here. Here it is. I got it. It's on the screen right now. Okay, now, what I want you to notice is this is the blessing. Yom HaShishi v'echulu hashamayim v'ha'aretz v'echor tzva'am. Okay? What's interesting is that people never noticed, if you look at the letter Yom from the right to the left, I want you to look at the first letter of the first 4 words. They're enlarged. Yom, Yod. Hashishi, Hey. Vachulu, which is Vav. Hashamayim, Hey. Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. How many of you have never seen the name of God in acrostic letters using what is said on the 6th day, the heavens and the earth, and all the hosts will complete it. This is in chapter 2 of the book of Genesis. Wow. Chapter 2 of the book of Genesis. So when you do the Kiddush, this is the Kiddush, when you welcome the Shabbat, because in the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 8, it tells you, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, but it doesn't tell you how. So there are 2 prayers that basically encompasses what is the holiness of God. The first part presents him as the king and creation. And the second part of the prayer presents him as the one who is a redeemer, who redeems us out of Egypt. So when we celebrate Shabbat, so what we're doing is we are sanctifying. By the way, in the Genesis story, the Sabbath is the only thing in the whole book of Genesis that is called holy. He sanctified. Nothing else in the book of Genesis. Noah is not called holy. Seth is not called holy. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Judah, Joseph, none of them are called holy. They are called perfect and righteous. Perfect in the sense of moral and righteous. Walk before me and be perfect. Tamim means to be moral. And here, Sadiq, they were righteous. What I told you earlier, he's looking for moral and righteous people. Isn't that cool? And you know what's interesting, my sister? He called you from the nations, knowing that we were neither moral nor righteous, and yet still he heard your cry, and still he extended the hand of fellowship, and still he sent his son to graft you into his kingdom, so that you may become that he's looking for. And the only thing he asks, after he does that for you, he defeats death. He gives you the sign of resurrection through Yeshua. He gives you a function. He gives you an identity. He gives you the inheritance that you don't deserve. He makes you a new creation. He sanctifies you. And then he says, would you please let everybody know that I am your king and your redeemer? This is too much for people. It's too traditional. When in fact it's a commandment. When you do it, you are fulfilling commandment number 4. Because you see, there was no way of doing it. So what happens, the rabbis, in their wisdom, understanding the mandate, what interesting, you see the Chazal enacted this mitzvah, be performing a cup of wine, so they do rituals. What are the rituals? What is the bread? What is the salt? What does the washing of the hands? What does the candles mean? The candles is a rite of passage. All it is to let everybody know that we went from the profane to the holy, from the common to the holy. What is important is that you don't light the fire on Shabbat. Many people in the Hebrew roots, they don't want to do the candle. And if they do, they light the fire when the sun goes down. So they don't want the tradition, but when they adhere to the tradition of the candles, then they light the fire on the Sabbath, which is against the commandment. I'd rather you be ignorant than do nothing. Because they're not trained. We're not understanding our purpose, our function, our job. Is to teach us we are the vessels. We are God's image bearers that now he says, will you let everybody know who your king is? I'll invite you to a dinner. The first thing God wants to do when he calls you into the kingdom is restore your family. The first commandment all of you observed was the Sabbath. Right? The first command. And then you set up the table. And the first thing we did when we started figuring out what we're not going to do. Oh, we don't want to do that. That's tradition of men. No, you don't understand. There was no way of understanding how to do it. And the Sabbath is sacred space. It's God's sacred space. So think about this. For a 24-hour period, every time the sun goes down, let's say in Australia, then New Zealand, then the Samoan Islands, then Hawaii, then you have Alaska, then you have Washington, then you have California, then you have all that. There is a Jew somewhere sanctifying the earth by proclaiming that blessing. And by proclaiming the blessing, they are using God's name in it. Are you with me? Is this making sense? It's a great honor. The sixth day, the heavens and the earth and all the hosts of them were completed. You just use God's name in it. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Within the structure of that prayer, you recognize He's your King. Listen to how it goes. And God finished by the seventh day the work which He had done. Now remember, He invited you to a dinner. You just came from the world. He separated you. He raised your level of honor. He redeemed you. He restored you. He gave you a new name. Now please sit at my table. I want to host you. I will provide for you. You don't have to work. I'll take care of you. Now, please get your family, and then I want you to bless your family. You will bless them on my behalf. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Your children will see you bless your wife blessing you blessing your children. That will stick with them forever. On a Friday night, the greatest gift to have our kids sitting on the table. One of my greatest gifts in this world is not that I play professional baseball, not that I've been accomplished in other areas. My greatest gift that I have in this world is that while I'm here right now with you, my wife and my kid, my son and his wife with guests in my family, they're keeping Shabbat over there. And my youngest son, when I'm not home, now he's taking care over of the Seder, of the Kiddush. He does it. My oldest son is in California with my granddaughter, and the greatest gift I have, that maybe around this time, maybe in another hour, he's going to be sitting down at a table welcoming Shabbat because he learned that in my house. To know that my family on a Friday night, they are actually proclaiming God's holiness, proclaiming His kingship, proclaiming His redemptive power, proclaiming and enjoying the table of the King. And all He asked of us is just set it aside. Let everybody know who I am. I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, who redeemed you out of the house of slavery. I restore your family. I restore your life. I give you honor and I give you provision. That's the God I serve. So how do they use elements of the temple? Because of the verses that I read you earlier. Sanctify the Sabbath and revere my sanctuary. When the temple was destroyed, they took elements from the temple and they applied it to the table. The table makes as if it was an altar. There's bread. There is salt. There is wine because of libations. There is salt because of a covenantal relationship. There's a blessing, the only time that a father is allowed to pray for the kids, using the Aaronic blessing, because that blessing is restricted only from the sons of Aaron. First thing He wants to do is restore your family. And that's too much for us to do. At the end of Shabbat, after you rejoice in resting in Him, He says, well, the entry of it is holy, the exit of it is holy. You go from sacred space to profane. Will you please do a rite of passage so that everybody knows that you're celebrating God's sacred space? It's called Havdalah. When you do the prayers, it's amazing because you learn to appreciate that sacred space. Now, let me read the blessing here, the Kiddush, for the people who are maybe watching on the internet. I want you to think about the blessing, how it's structured. In the middle of it, there is, why do we wash our hands? That comes from the temple. There's a psalm. Who shall come to the mountain of the Lord? Those who have clean hands and a pure heart. Clean hands, righteousness, idolatry. Basically, every time I do this, I'm asking the Lord, am I righteous to sit at your table? Am I innocent of any idolatry to sit at your table? If only we understood the gift, the honor that God gives us to be His peculiar people. And instead of fighting all this stuff, we would understand the blessing that God gives us to be joining the Jewish people worldwide, doing the same thing. Don't matter if they agree with us or not. It's irrelevant. Be grateful for God choosing you. So the sun goes down. Let's start in Hong Kong, 12 hours from here. Okay? The sun goes down. Then you go to New Zealand. Perth on the western side of Australia. Then you go to the eastern side. Or you go to Melbourne, right? And then you go to the eastern side in Sydney. Then you go to New Zealand. Then you go to those places. The sun starts going out. As the sun goes down, some of the lights out with the candles were already lit. In other words, sacred space. And the sun started going down on all the Jewish people. Start going. The sixth day on the heavens and the earth, well, all the host of them were completed, and God finished the seventh day, His work which He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all the work that He had done. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, sanctified it. For on it He rested from all His work which God was created to function. Then we say, Sabri Maranan, and we say, Lechaim. And then we go, blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who created the fruit of the vine. He provides. Remember, we are the type of Adam. We are the gardeners in God's kingdom. Okay? And then we do the blessing. After that, we go and we say, blessed are you, O Lord our God. Pay attention to the second structure of the blessing. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who had hallowed us with His commandments and has desired us and has given us in love, goodwill, His holy Sabbath as a heritage, in remembrance of the work of creation as King and Creator, first of the holy festivals, commemorating the exodus from Egypt, which is resurrection. For you have chosen us. Think about this. For you have chosen us and sanctified us from among all the nations with love and goodwill, giving us your holy Sabbath as a heritage. And then we said, blessed are you, O Lord, who hallows the Sabbath. Amen. Then we wash our hands. Then we break the bread. That's all He wants from us. Sanctify it. Just let everybody know. Not only do I restore you from death, I give you honor. I make a covenant with you. I gave you righteousness. I made you a new creation. I brought order to your family, and I'm making you sacred space. Remember this, child? Remember this? Remember this? Not only did God make a covenant with us, He gave us a righteousness apart from the law, which is life. He bestowed upon us honor by giving us a new name, giving us a tribe, being part of His kingdom, grafted in. Made us a new creation, meaning that the moment we went in the waters, we're no longer the old creature. We're a new creation. We are now destined for life instead of death. New creation motif. He made order in our home by embracing His covenant. Now He makes us sacred space by making us holy into the kingdom and by also sanctifying our home. When you put your mezuzah in your house, you know what you're doing? When you put the mezuzah, you are proclaiming your house as sacred space. It's like a mini embassy of God on the earth, where He reigns, where He rules, where everything is all so that He is king in our home. Can you understand why I'm passionate about this? I'm understanding that, God has, for some reason, He saw me calling out to Him. He actually believed me when I asked Him for the opportunity to try to make a difference, because I gave my best to the world. And I prayed and I begged Him, I still do, To this day, I still beg them for the opportunity to continue to be accountable, to be responsible, because all I want is for the nations to see how good and how kind, how righteous, how holy, and that in him there's no unrighteousness, that he is a good king. Because of that, it comes with a cost. It comes with a cost. But I'd rather pay that cost here, serving a righteous king in the midst of unrighteous people, than serving unrighteous people and then have to account to a righteous king. So the commandment is not just a commandment. A commandment is the instruction and the structure that God has chosen to guide us and lead us and protect us and provide for us so that we may be that image bearers that he requires of us. Now you have an amazing gift. What are you going to do with it? Can't do anymore. The ultimate price was willing to send his son to account for something that he didn't do wrong, just so that we can be a nation unto God. We have a lot of repentance to do. We don't even welcome Shabbat the right way. Why is that? We're afraid what the world's going to say. Who cares? We're going to be grateful to what he did for us. Now, these customs are only values. Teaches us values. It teaches us what, for example, my youngest son, he connects with Shabbat because of the wine. My oldest because of the bread. Me is because when my wife prays for me. There's no greater honor than when my wife prays for me. My wife. When you made mistakes in your past and God gives you the opportunity to restore your life, and no matter how much of a knucklehead you are, when the Shabbat enters, your wife puts his hand on you and he prays, and she prays in such a loving way that made me realize how blessed I am. Not only to be a servant of God, but to be restored in a relationship in which somebody actually loves me for real. And my kids respect me. Like we say in Passover, Dayenu. Anything else is just icing on the cake. If we only understand the gift we have, I think we will put the Torah more in the forefront of our lives, and it's not going to be burdensome. On the opposite, one of the prayers, and I'll finish with this. One of the prayers that I do every morning. Modeani lefanecha, melechai v'chayam. Blessed, I gratefully thank you, Lord, for restoring my soul within me. And then after that, I say, Lord, I want to serve you today. It's like, the 12-step program, I'm not thinking a year. I get up in the morning, I said, today I want to be the best servant to you. Just try to take one day at a time. Remember that song, One Day at a Time with Jesus? When you follow Torah, one day at a time with Yeshua. Through Yeshua, I can serve God. How do I serve you, my King? What do you need me to do, my Elohim? How can I be the vessel that you require, oh my King? How can I praise you, O Lord? How can I please you? How can I exalt you? What do you need me to do? Sometimes we fall short. Then we start the next day. And the Torah teaches us through examples. There are times when I need motivation and I feel unworthy. Then I read Abraham. Wow. If you did it for him, you could do it for me. Every single storyline in the Bible shows real people with real problems, with real issues, and how God still used them, and how they still gave their loyalty unto the Most High without really knowing them, with no information. Abraham didn't have all this information. They lived it. We need to learn it. So how can we return to Torah when we never had that as a point of reference in the first place? We can't return to something we never knew before. We're trying to walk back to the original. We're trying to return to God, learning the Torah as we go along. And instead of minimizing, discarding, and changing, maybe we should consider learning what our purpose and our role is in His kingdom. I think the commandments are a beautiful tool to teach us about the righteousness and the holiness, and the capability of God to still make a covenant with humanity when he can just go and we'll all be dead. Who is going to challenge him? Who's going to tell him he can't when we continually transgress the covenant? But because of his promise and because of his namesake, he made an oath. Interesting. He made an oath and he's above everything and he still honors his oath, although he accounts to no one. That to me is incredible. Thus is the reason why I will go anywhere, even for one, to teach about the commandments of my King, because I'm grateful. May the Lord bless you and keep you guys. Shabbat shalom. I pray this was a blessing to you guys. It's a blessing. To those brothers and sisters on the internet, tomorrow we're going to come back at 10 in the morning. We're going to have 5 teachings, and it's going to be all New Testament context of the letter. So Paul in its cultural background. Please come back and join us. I think you're going to have a great time learning more about the first century scriptures, first century writings in light of its cultural context. Shalom. See you guys tomorrow. Any questions?
It had 5 steps in there, where the king.
Oh, yeah, let me get it for you.
Yeah, that.
You're looking for the, I think is right here. Nope.
The
Let me close
citation.
this.
The citation.
Is this one. This right here.
Yeah.
The 5 steps.
Yeah, and that was in what resource?
This is in the Harper's Collins Bible Dictionary. But I can send it to you via text if you want.
Yeah. Yeah, because as you were going through that, so basically, understanding these things, then we know why things were laid out the way they were in the time it was written, and it brought to mind a very controversial book in the New Testament.
Which one?
A statement that was made. Oh, it was in Galatians chapter 3, the promise that God made to Abraham.
Yeah.
And he made a statement there that says, though it be but a man's covenant, no man, and it be confirmed, no man can change it or disannul it or add to it. And I was just thinking that you said that when God makes a promise, he can't go back on his promise, okay?
At all.
And so that was kind of the context that Paul was using it.
Absolutely.
Understanding that.
But what's interesting, let's read verse 20 and 21. This is quite interesting. Let me ask you this before I read it. What is the only thing the Torah cannot do for you? Does anybody have any bottled water that I could have maybe?
Yeah, I got a new one right here.
All right.
I got 2.
What is the only thing the Torah cannot do for you?
Save you from the grave.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Save you from cannot give you life.
Yep.
That's why in Romans chapter 3, it says, for the righteousness of God, apart from the law. It doesn't mean the Torah does not have a focus or a purpose. It means that the Torah can guide you in sacred space, but it cannot provide eternal life. That's a gift of the King. Okay? Listen to what verse 19 and 20 says. For why then the law? Well, it was added on account of transgressions, until the descendants shall come, to whom it will have been promised, having been ordered through angels by the hand of a mediator. Now the mediator is not for one, but God is one. Therefore, this is the key. Therefore, is the law opposed to the promises of God? May never be. For if a law have been given that was able to give life, certainly righteousness would have been from the law. I mean, he does an incredible job explaining the reason why Yeshua died and resurrected. Because the Torah is not equipped to give you eternal life. You died in a covenantal relationship. That's the purpose of Romans chapter 11. Hebrews 11. The Hall of Fame of the dead. The Hall of Fame of death, what do they all have in common? They all die. And if you read in the latter verses, it tells you that is the hope. Hope is resurrection. They died believing that God would give them life for being moral and righteous image bearers. That's why he's using Genesis, to let them know that Genesis promised inheritance. When you keep reading, right here in verse 23, it says, but before faith came, we were detained under the law, in prison until the coming faith was revealed. In prison, why? Because everybody died. The Torah kept you in sacred space. God promised he will redeem you. How do we know he was going to redeem us? Well, he led the people through the Red Sea. They were slaves in Egypt. We are slaves to death. He led the second generation to the River Jordan. They were in the wilderness. Slavery. In the wilderness is shame, exiled. It represents their life. Every story in the Bible is trying to let you know how God has dominion over the realm of life and death. If only you believe in God and you live a righteous life according to the covenantal conditions and covenants, he will do the rest. That's the faith. The faith is, I believe you will vindicate me if I live according to your standards. And I'm going to be loyal to you even though I've never seen you. I don't really know your name, but I know you're good. I read it. I see it. Every story is to show you that I'm not alone. That a murderer did it one time and God used them like Moses and David. And then you have issues with the house of Joseph and the house of Jacob. One brother wants to kill the other brothers. One brother goes away and sleeps with a woman. And my Lord, it's a family in dysfunction. So it gives me hope. God uses people in greater height to messed up mindsets. No wonder he welcomed me. That's an encouragement. Yeshua spoke to everybody, to the sick, he healed them all, he fed them all. He never made a distinction between any of them. That's why the Pharisees were mad at him. Why are you hanging out with people who are not righteous and holy like us? Yeshua says, no, I came to everybody. They're calling out to God. I'm here because God sent me to go for them. I'm the messenger that God sent to give them the message of righteousness. He answered their call. And what did he tell the leper? Go to the temple and do what the Torah says. The guy who got healed at the beautiful gate, what did he do? He ran into the temple courts to praise God. He's been sitting on that door for years maybe. The moment he's healed, the first instinct is to go into the temple to worship God. Man, we're missing it, man. We're really missing the boat. We are focusing on so many different things that are leading us to a wasteful understanding of the Bible instead of helpful understanding of what the Bible is trying to tell us. Trying to figure out some things that no one really knows. Make sense? Any other question? You guys are an easy crowd. Did it make sense? Hopefully now when you read the commandments, now you understand the honor. Now you know why we stand. Because the king speaks to a people who doesn't deserve that king. Thank you guys. Shalom. See you guys tomorrow at 10.